I rely heavily on medical information for what I do, but I really don't see psychedelics fitting solely within the medical model. I think that that's an important piece of it. I think there are persons that are going to be better served with psychedelics through that model, but I don't think that you need to have a refractory illness where you've failed several first-line pharmaceutical drugs before you should be allowed to eat psychedelics. That just sounds not in line with what the observational and biomedical research currently says about the safety of psychedelics. And so I'm going to support medical use, but I'm not going to just support medical use.
Welcome to Modern Psychedelics, where we explore the transformations made possible through intentional engagement with psychedelics. This podcast will help you integrate high consciousness living into the everyday and deepen the work ignited by altered states. You can expect balanced and grounded conversations around therapeutic, ceremonial, and recreational containers. My name is Lana Pribic, your host and guide. I am a 3-time certified professional life coach, and I work with people who want to integrate higher levels of consciousness into their daily lives so they can feel more peace, fulfillment, and connection. After all, our time here on Earth is so brief, so let's make sure we're really living. The song you hear is called Lost Horizon by Peace Sign. All right, let's journey. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode. So today I have a guest interview for you guys with Ben Malcolm, aka the Spirit Pharmacist. You've probably come across him at some point, and that is exactly why I have been wanting to interview him for a long time. Before we get into today's guest, I just want to let you guys know that, as always, I'm onboarding new clients into my one-on-one coaching program. Now is a great time to get started with your coaching journey. If you've never worked with a coach, it's absolutely amazing. I heard this explanation of the difference between therapy and coaching the other day, and I absolutely loved it. Therapy gets you out of the hole. Coaching gets you over the mountain. I just love that. So if you are kind of out of the hole and you're ready to start climbing a mountain, starting to build a life and create some momentum for yourself, coaching is great. Coaching with me is psychedelics informed. I'm highly skilled, highly trained, and I can really support you and hold you through your transformation. So I'm going to leave a link below if you would like to apply for my program or learn more. And after you apply, you will receive a link to book a discovery call with me where we can chat casually for about 30 minutes about whether it's the right program for you, because I only want to work with the people who I can actually serve. So that being said, I'm just so excited for the summer season. It's about late May as this episode is coming out. And I am just gearing up to have a bit of a different summer than last. Last year was a lot of socializing, partying. This year is going to be a lot of hard work. There's going to be a lot of work this summer, and I'm kind of getting ready to balance buckling down with work. I'm working on just so many projects. I haven't really told you guys, but I am building a company. I am launching a product soon. It's going to be separate from, but related to modern psychedelics. So just have so much going on right now, including my Being True to You course training. And I'm just going through the grinder right now, but still showing up. So anyone else out there who's going through such a busy season, I feel you. I'm with you. We got this. Know that there's seasons in life though. Some are busier, some are not. So yeah, that's just a little personal update for me. So let's get to today's guest. Ben Malcolm is just such a wealth of information. For my science-y folks, you're going to love this episode. I like to throw a science-based episode out there every once in a while, even though it's not my personal language. I know that it's really empowering and important to at least be aware of it. Ben Malcolm is known as the Spirit Pharmacist. He is a psychopharmacology consultant and psychedelic educator. He earned his bachelor's degree in pharmacology at the University of California at Santa Barbara. Prior to his master's in public health and doctorate of pharmacy, he then completed postgraduate residencies in acute care at Scripps Mercy Hospital and psychiatric pharmacy at the University of California at San Diego. So he's very well trained. After his residency, he passed his exam to become board certified in psychiatric pharmacy. So we are so lucky to have him in the psychedelic space, lending his knowledge to us. And in this episode, Ben really talks about his vision for society, for the world, and his vision for integrating psychedelic drugs into the world without excluding any types of use, which I really appreciate. This episode is great because, well, I originally wanted to have Ben come on because I get a lot of people asking me questions around using psychedelics when they are on antidepressants or tapering off of antidepressants with microdosing. What drugs are contraindicated with others? What should we avoid mixing together? And, Ben has all the answers to those questions, which are all in this episode. And then we also talk about some really interesting things. I really liked the end of our discussion because I got to ask him some questions around my two favorite psychedelics, Iboga and 5-MeO. So we talked about like reintroducing substances after Iboga, the effect that alcohol has on Iboga. We talked about drug interactions to be aware of. And I had to ask him about the mystery of 5-MeO DMT reactivations in cannabis. If you guys have heard my story about that when I interviewed Steve, I'll pop that episode in the show notes. Yeah, it seems like cannabis reactivates 5-MeO, and I asked him a little bit about that, and I got him to talk to us a little bit about 5-MeO. So look out for that at the end. I hope that you enjoy this episode. Definitely save it and then also share it with someone who might find it useful. It's just a really important episode to kind of have in the archive and to refer people back to. And you can also work with Ben. So if you are on a journey of tapering off of your meds or doing that with microdosing, he actually has a la carte offer where you can book a session with him and you can kind of do your protocol knowing that you are doing it in a safe way. And he has tons of resources on his website. So we'll also link that below. All right, guys, enjoy this episode. I'll catch you on the other side with Ben. All right. Hi, everyone. So I am here with someone that you have probably seen on Instagram, on the internet. You've probably come across the Spirit Pharmacist at some point in your psychedelic research. Ben Malcolm, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's really wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I've been wanting to reach out for so long, and it's so lovely to have you here. We have some audience questions for you today. We're just going to learn a lot together. So just to begin, please introduce yourself to the audience and tell us what is your role and your mission in the psychedelic space?
So I'm Ben Malcolm of Spirit Pharmacist LLC, or maybe just more simply like the Spirit Pharmacist. My background and training is in pharmacy and in psychiatry. So I'm trained as a psychiatric pharmacist, but I specialize in psychedelics and how they interface with traditional types of psychiatric medications. At this point in time, I call myself a psychopharmacology consultant and psychedelic educator because I think that it is closest to what I actually do on a day-to-day basis. I do individualized consulting, or maybe consulting even for organizations, providers, and also have a lot of educational related efforts, both in my own kind of webinars, courses, written information guides, as well as being guest faculty in a lot of different training programs related to helping people get up to speed with best practices around using psychedelics. And specifically, I usually talk about pharmacology in those kinds of training programs. So psychedelic education and consulting seems to be the bread and butter of what I do. So that's where I title myself these days.
So I want to get to the interactions and tapering, but just based on your expertise and how you've woven together psychedelics and pharmacology, what is the vision that you have, if any, for how psychedelics fit into pharmaceuticals?
Oh, so if you just go to spiritpharmacist.com and go to the About page, I have a short biography, but then it really talks about his vision, the vision, right? And so my vision is that psychedelics are going to be safely integrated back into society for a number of different types of reasons or purposes. Religious freedom, absolutely. Decriminalization, because no plants should be illegal in the first place, and there isn't really very much good public health safety data to suggest that any drug should be illegal in the first place. Okay, religious freedom, people deserve that. Decriminalization, that's just a public health win. Before we even start talking about using for medical types of purposes or reasons, I do think that psychedelics are going to fit into a pharmaceutical or a medical type of model, and I think that's a really important channel for certain sections of the population to be able to access psychedelics through. And I think that the research that is leading towards approval for those types of medical interventions of psychedelic assisted therapy is the safety data that we're going to need to set psychedelics free in the other types of use cases as well. So I rely heavily on medical information for what I do, but I really don't see psychedelics fitting solely within the medical model. I think that's an important piece of it. I think think there are persons that are going to be better served with psychedelics through that model. But I don't think that you need to have a refractory illness where you've failed several first-line pharmaceutical drugs before you should be allowed to eat psychedelics. That just sounds like, Prohibition 2.0, extremely gatekeepery, not in line with what the observational and biomedical research currently says about the safety of psychedelics. And so I'm going to support medical use, but I'm not going to just support medical use.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear that that's your perspective. What is your favorite psychedelic and why? I want to know. I know it's so hard to choose one. I know.
It depends on what season of my life I was in and what was going on at that time. I would say that at this point in time, like ketamine is probably my favorite type of psychedelic, like overall. But boy, I've cycled through a lot of them.
Yeah.
I think if it was kind of like maybe this way, like if you were stuck on a desert island and you only had one psychedelic to use for the rest of the life, which would you pick? I probably would pick ketamine just because it's such a wonderful experience in itself, but because it has such broad medical utility, right? Like it has analgesic effects and things of that nature. Not to say that tryptamine psychedelics don't have other medical properties, anti-inflammatory effects and things like that, but they're a little bit less known than ketamine. Okay. Yeah.
I'm a little surprised by your answer because it's not a classic psychedelic, right? So from a pharmacology perspective, can you tell us what makes ketamine a psychedelic?
So like my entire 20s, I knew very little about ketamine. And if you would have asked me much about it at that sort of like time or phase of my life, I'd probably say, yeah, that's not really a psychedelic, or that's like the black sheep of the psychedelic family or something like that, and that it's addictive and habit forming. And I tried a lot of different serotonin-based psychedelics throughout my 20s. And I also had cyclical spastic back pain that would come back during those years. And my entire 20s, I couldn't actually do a sit-up. Like I would have to actually roll onto my side and get up and get out of bed in this sort of like strange way. It's like I had this very specific way of moving throughout the world so that I didn't trigger this pain. But I never got the pain like worked up through a doctor's office because it was a traveling back pain, right? So it was like, I just knew that there was nothing structurally really wrong with me. And I really didn't want to go down the route of like opioid related painkillers or MRIs repeated and getting worked up. Well, maybe you need to have some kind of surgery, you can shave some kind of piece of bone off your, like all of that seemed like is probably going to lead to a more entrenched kind of problem over a period of time. And there was something around age somewhere between like 30 and 33 where I started to use ketamine a little bit. And then I think around age 33, I don't know, maybe habitual, like something between a habit and a ritual. So like regular, like once every other week, like once weekly to every other week kind of use. And I would just get into these kinds of spaces where my intestines would make these like growling sounds, like it was like the hungriest you've ever thought you'd ever be in the entire life. And then it would relax. And then it would, just in the ketamine space, it would guide me. It would say, okay, now push on this part of your abdomen and ask it to release. Don't force it to release. Don't push too hard. Just hold it there, focus on it, acknowledge it, and ask it to release and relax. And it would take some period of time, 1 or 2 minutes, but then this big intestinal kind of growling, ripping sensation. And I noticed like my back just started to feel better and better. And I realized it was not so much back pain, but referred organ pain linked to maybe uncomfortable situations, trauma in the past, difficult relationships that I was still currently engaged or involved with, as well as all of my own bad maladaptive habits that had come along to deal with those kinds of emotional discomforts. And I would say that ketamine freed me from the cyclical spastic back pain and taught me how to do it without using the substance. And I think that's the thing. It's like, it's okay if you do these certain stretches or hold your abdomen a certain way when you feel a certain thing. So it really kind of taught me as far as, I don't know, just a job where you're in mental health, when you're consulting, it can get very heavy. You're hearing really heavy things like all the time. And it's, if you're a halfway empathic person, it's hard not to take on some of that to some degree. And then, of course, you have your own life and stress to worry about and think about as well. So I see it a little bit like every now and again, you just find yourself in a bathtub of dirty water and you really have to kind of like let the water out and run a new bath. And this kind of habitual sort of use taught me like, okay, these are about the frequencies, like every 1 to 2 weeks, you really need to carve out a time and space for yourself and do this kind of like sequence of things to keep yourself well. And so I would say that, yeah, I'm just so incredibly grateful to ketamine for showing me the way out of that decade-long pain cycle, because the others didn't. It was squarely the ketamine that did. So I have a lot of gratitude for that one and the kind of like season of my life that I'm in right now. But to say the others haven't also had incredible impacts at different times, is they have.
I feel you on that. Yeah, there's definitely these cycles and waves with medicine. As we change, our preferences and our attractiveness to certain medicines also change, and that's perfectly fine. But it's amazing that you were able to receive such a transformation from ketamine. Wow.
Yeah, I think I was like really lacking in like core strength and like self-confidence. There was something like, there was like an emptiness, like there was just a few experiences where it's, I don't know, everyone wants to call you doctor, but you're a PharmD, you're a pharmacist. Are you really a doctor? And there was just like this sense of imposter syndrome, I think, for like a few years. And there was something about it that finally clicked, and it was like, dude, like you are, and you can heal yourself, and this is how you're going to do it. And then it just unfolded that way.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on being a life coach myself, how many aches and pains I have in my body. Just listening to your story, I'm like, ooh, that makes sense. I need to start prioritizing some tune-up dates for myself, because you're right, the energy does get stored in the body, right? Emotions get stored in the body when we're hearing them from others. So yeah, thank you for that reflection. Let's extract all that beautiful information in your brain. People have so many questions about interactions and tapering protocols. This is just so important, not just for harm reduction, but just for people to be informed and to know what's going on here. So let's start with tapering. What do people need to know? I feel like SSRIs are the biggest one out there. But what do people need to know about tapering off of meds such as SSRIs before a psychedelic experience? Is there a protocol and just general guidelines that you can give people?
Well, I think one thing that's good to know is if you're on an antidepressant and you don't feel like tapering or stepping off of it, it's 100% compatible with ketamine. And more information is suggesting it's at least halfway compatible with psilocybin. For example, persons that are taking antidepressants that want to have psilocybin experiences, I think it's about a 50-50 shot whether they can get the experience that they want with normal or higher than normal doses, or whether they can't. So that one sort of feels like a real individual decision to me at this point in time about whether a person really wants to go the taper and washout route, or they want to try it in combination, see how well it works. And if it doesn't work, then they can go a taper route type of way, because it doesn't seem like it's harmful or dangerous for people to try that in combination. MDMA and SSRIs or SNRI types of antidepressants, my experience is it tends to really dud. The only persons I've really had tell me that MDMA worked well for them while taking antidepressants is persons that were on like homeopathic doses, like doses that were well below what psychiatry would consider like the minimum effective dose for depression. But probably still not too dangerous to try if you're on a standard dose of an antidepressant, you plan a standard dose of MDMA. Whereas things like ayahuasca and Ibogaine are going to be a lot more black and white. No, we're not mixing them together. With ayahuasca, you're not mixing them together because of the MAOIs. You can get really serious serotonin syndrome, serotonin toxicities. With Ibogaine, you're not going to mix them together because a lot of them block CYP2D6, and Ibogaine is just very sensitive to CYP2D6, and it's something that could raise the cardiotoxic potential of Ibogaine if we really start bumping up the concentrations because of a drug interaction. So that being said, like I think like the first step, because I think historically, like 15 or 20 years ago, it would be like, don't mix antidepressants with mushrooms, you're going to die of serotonin syndrome. And then it was like, no one's ever died of mushrooms that we really know of, or it's debatable or controversial whether they've really died from like psilocybin mushrooms. So that doesn't make a ton of sense overall. And then the pendulum swung to, no, don't ever do them in combination because it never works. You can't get any kind of effect out of it. And that also now seems like it's somewhere in the middle. Like antidepressants produce neuroadaptive types of responses, like downregulation of serotonin receptors. That happens to a variable degree across the people that take antidepressants. And it seems like those neuroadaptive effects that happen to a variable degree are what we think is responsible for the drug interaction. So it's a little bit more like, well, gosh, like I think that some people are going to be able to do this on their antidepressant and get pretty good results, and other persons aren't. I think that a lot of thought needs to go into like the decision-making point around, do I taper an antidepressant? Okay, sure. Spirit Pharmacist. I do want to taper my antidepressant. I've been on it for a number of years. I started it at a time of crisis. The last few years, I've been doing some therapy. I've got some different emotional coping skills. I feel fairly good right now. I've been reading about psychedelics, but frankly, I'm just curious about who I might be off my antidepressant and whether I was going to use psilocybin or not. I think I would want to try a taper and wash out. And I would like to plan some psilocybin experiences along with that, just to have some spiritual experiences, continue the kind of self-work and personal growth phase that I've been in my life. Sounds great, right? Versus the person that's a little bit more, I started this a year ago. It's been so helpful. I tried to reduce the dose in a controlled way once. It was a total train wreck. I'm not feeling that great now. I'm hoping psilocybin could make me feel better. And I've got 2 small kids in the house under 5. Jeez, we could be signing you up for a really rough period. It doesn't sound like you're doing well right now. You're telling me that the medication worked pretty well for you and you still feel like it's working well for you, and dose decreases are very difficult. Gosh, maybe we want to see what your sensitivity to psilocybin is like by taking some really tiny doses, maybe even microdoses. Okay, maybe there's a little bit of effect there. Okay, then maybe we can plan some higher thing in combination because it's not dangerous to do, and you could be helped to a degree that maybe tapering the antidepressant is feasible afterwards. Right? Sorts of different courses for different persons with different histories, because the antidepressants are used for lots of different types of psychiatric conditions that have lots of different kinds of severities. And there's a lot of just variability as far as whether they can get off and whether it's a good time to even try to stop it or get off the medication. All right. They want to try and taper the medication. I think 10 to 25% dose decreases every 2 to 4 weeks as tolerated is a fairly safe pace. 25% dose reductions every 2 weeks get somebody off in about 2 months. 10% dose reductions every 4 weeks get someone off in 10 months, right? So that's a pretty wide range there. Somewhere between 2 and 10 months is about the time frame that you should probably budget for a taper. Some persons, for whatever reasons, can go a little bit faster. They'll be taking it shorter. They're less sensitive to withdrawal. They never really felt much from it anyway. The dose is lower. But I think most persons that have been taking antidepressants for at least a year or two or few that are not on the lowest dose should budget at least a couple of months. And I think on average, somewhere between 2 to 4 months is a pretty safe and comfortable phase for a lot of persons out there.
So for people who do want to go ahead and taper off, I think you gave some good general guidelines. Obviously, people can work with you personally if they want a personalized plan and support, which is what an amazing resource. For people who are choosing to taper and they're giving themselves, let's say 2 to 4, maximum of 10 months to taper off, what are some tips and some ways that they can really sail through that period smoothly? Because I imagine it's really hard to taper off of medicine. Yeah. So what are some ways that people can be?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah. Just different, so many different people out there. Some people look at me and they're kind of I quit taking heroin and crack. I could cold turkey this 20 milligrams of Prozac. It ain't not going to be any challenge at all. And I believe them. And then some people will take a dose decrease and run into really severe kinds of symptoms and things like that. So it's difficult for me to express just how much variability I hear and see when it comes to getting rid or stopping antidepressants overall. I think that oftentimes it's a little bit easier in the first half of the dosing range compared to the second half of the dosing range. And oftentimes going from some medication to no medication is the most difficult kind of step. So there's different thoughts about how to taper out there. I still am a little bit thinking along the lines of let's try to do some linear dose reductions that are spaced out every 2 to 4 weeks. And I usually will start my kind of planning there because I think it's just more feasible than some other types of ways, or it's less tedious than some other types of ways. But there's a new school of thought out there in antidepressant tapering called hyperbolic tapering, which basically would allow someone to taper a little bit quicker in the first half of the dosing range. But once it switches to the second half of the dosing range, or about the minimum effective dose that we think of for depression, it really slows down. And there's several very tiny sorts of dose decreases towards the end. And there's some science from PET imaging experiments and things like that that supports that it may be an easier way for people to get off or stop medications. But it's going to require some really tedious compounding and some not custom and standardized kinds of doses, right? So that's the thing, is it's almost like I feel that the regulatory agencies need to force antidepressant manufacturers to make more smaller doses specifically for people tapering or stepping off, because the way that things are set up right now, it's almost like you just ask the patient to take a step off a really tall curb and hope for the best, which is, some people can do it just fine. And it's so much more feasible when you do those kind of linear dose reductions that it's nice when people can. But if a person's maybe gotten down a couple doses and then they take their third dose reduction and, oh, that one was so much harder, that's probably a good indication maybe to go back to the previous dose, wait a week or two, and then just try much smaller dose reductions from there, because you really might be entering that phase of the taper where you're going to need to go a whole lot slower to continue having success. Do some other stuff. Have a therapy session. Get a personal coach that's going to help you work out. Talk to a nutritionist and try to change your diet a little bit. Exercise and sunshine are natural things that boost the body's serotonin stores and create more neurotransmitter synthesis. I think the people that it's really flown by are the ones where it's like, well, what was the part that made you successful in this? You're like, I don't know. I was just doing so many things. I was sort of working on my diet, and I was trying this new meditation app before bedtime, and I was seeing a new therapist every other week, and I'd gotten some new recipes, and I was trying to do this thing with my diet, and I don't really know what part of it was. Maybe I was just distracted. And so I think that's also a piece of it, is that, I don't know, maybe like at least the first or second step, I think some level of monitoring to try to understand, like, what is my pattern? If I take a dose reduction, how many days is it before I notice changes? And what kind of changes do I notice? And how long is it before those changes start to resolve or get worse or change into something else? I think once a person has some of those patterns, they may be able to plan subsequent steps a bit better. Okay, I take a step down on my whatever, Paxil or paroxetine. Within 72 hours, I know that I took a dose decrease. About 12, 14 days later, I start to feel slightly better. It seems like by about day 20, I would say that I'm more or less at where I was. Okay, we're not going to go to the triggering family reunion on day 10. We're going to be talking with the loved ones and people around us that know us well and that we can trust, and say things like, I'm going through this process right now, and it's a big kind of like deal for me. And if I seem a little different, or I'm a little more irritable or short, I want you to know that it's not a personal thing, and this is happening for a finite period of time. And to the extent that you can, I would really support and like compassion, right? I think it's hard when a person takes a step down and it's a week later and their partner's like, you're off your meds, you need to get back on them. I mean, I think some feedback from the partner, if the symptoms are severe and the person's falling apart, is very, very like reasonable. It's just kind of, okay, well, you know, the person may need to take some smaller dose decreases or do something different or add some other types of things. I think supplements can sometimes help persons. There's not a whole lot of data or evidence for any particular supplement helping a person, but sometimes higher doses of CBD can help with anxiety or sleep. I really like this lavender oil supplement called Calmade or Selexin, helpful for symptoms of generalized anxiety. A lot of persons actually feel that just taking small microdoses can help stave off some of the mood or withdrawal symptoms linked with lower doses of antidepressants, to the extent where I really feel like we need some better research into the potential of microdosing to be a serotonergic drug tapering aid rather than a mood uplifting thing in of itself. Okay, test that, but also test its ability to help people stop serotonergic medications, because that seems like one of the most commonly reported things about microdosing, at least from where I'm sitting in the world. So there's probably lots of different things a person can do in the realms of supplements, in the realms of their relationships, in the realms of just lifestyle related things that could keep them busy or distracted or otherwise improve their health along the way, that makes the whole tapering process a bit smoother.
Good tips for, in general, going through any type of change or any type of transition in life. Those are some really solid tips. Always goes back to basics. Tell us a little bit more about tapering and microdosing, because I know a lot of people who are on antidepressants try to taper off of them and switch to microdosing. So what can you share with us about that and things people should know about?
Yeah, so not exactly sure how it should be done. I'll share that right off the bat. Like sometimes people are like, I'm going to be tapering, so I should start microdosing. I'm like, I'm not sure if we want to start the microdosing like a prophylactic immunization against antidepressant withdrawal symptoms. Because if you start the microdosing and then start your taper is going excellent. You didn't really know if microdosing is helping. If your tapering is going bad, you don't know if the microdose is making it worse or if the taper rate's wrong. So I would actually prefer a person to start their antidepressant taper, maybe take a step or two, maybe do a little bit of monitoring and wait till they feel something a bit different. I am feeling some of those small electric shock sensations. I've noticed my sleep, it's getting a little bit harder to fall asleep, or maybe there's a couple times in the last week where I've had a mid-nocturnal awakening at 4 a.m. and I haven't really been able to go back to sleep. Geez, it would be nice if some of that stuff dried up or changed. Okay, why don't we try a couple of microdoses this week, in particular on the microdosing days? Do you get less brain zaps? Is it a little bit easier to drift off? Are you still having those mid-nocturnal awakenings? So I like it that the person has a symptom or a withdrawal symptom to focus on with the microdosing, because I think it puts them in a better position to clearly and squarely give the feedback that the microdosing was beneficial. Or if it isn't, if it flares anxiety in some way or makes sleep even more difficult, then hopefully that's clear for them to see as well. And maybe that doesn't mean cease and desist microdosing. Maybe that means we change doses, try again. Like microdosing is something that I think inherently at the beginning, a person is in kind of an experimental phase where they're building a relationship with a substance. I think that there's room for trying some different sorts of microdoses to see how they affect them. Maybe at different times of day, maybe different doses on different days. Maybe if it's a workday, weekday, it's truly low and subperceptual. You have mini dose on a Saturday and Sunday where you got 4 to 6 hours to carve out for yourself, and it's self-care Saturday or whatever. I think that persons probably should not microdose for longer than 3 months at a time on a consistent basis because of this theoretical risk of valvular heart disease. And if you're thinking about what I said earlier with this taper rates, I suggested that a taper time frame might be 2 to 10 months. So if a person is going to use microdosing to help them taper, but they're planning a 4-month taper, can they even microdose the entire time safely? It's an open question, and I'm not sure I would have a person continue microdosing that long. / my routine counseling is not to go over 3 months with the microdosing. So I think if you're one of the persons that's planning a shorter taper, like 2 to 3 months, you might be able to microdose along the way. Or maybe the first month you do a couple of step downs, and then you have the last couple of months of microdosing plus an extra month of microdosing after you're done with the antidepressant. That might fit pretty good, that kind of plan. But if you're someone that's a little bit longer, I've tried tapering antidepressants a few times, it hasn't gone well. This time I'm going to go that 6 to 10 month plan. I'm going to do monthly sorts of step downs on the antidepressant. Maybe it makes a little more sense to do like small courses of microdosing. For example, a person takes a step down on their antidepressant, they wait 2, 3, 4, 5 days, they do 2 weeks of microdosing to cover them for an acute withdrawal period. Then they have 10 days free of microdosing before their next dose decrease, right? So they have I'm covering myself for what I think is going to be the peak or the most acute aspects of withdrawal with just a short couple weeks of microdosing, and then actually give myself another week or two to get my new baseline or understand like where I'm at before I make further dose decreases. So depending on who you are and how long you're going to take to taper the antidepressant, you may have to take breaks from microdosing in there, which might necessitate some different sorts of planning just for safety around the kind of unknown unknowns with microdosing.
Yeah, you mentioned the heart health thing being uncertain with psilocybin. Do we know anything about the effects of certain psychedelics on heart health and brain health?
Okay, so the idea with chronic administration of psychedelics being potentially bad for the heart, it's actually bad for the heart valves, right? So it's valvular heart disease. It's a chronic type of drug toxicity, and it's linked with substances that can stimulate the serotonin 2B receptor, or maybe just have a high affinity for the serotonin 2B receptor. And so there's been a few different classes of drugs that have been able to lead to valvular heart disease in the past. Some of them were some of the old school migraine ergo types of medications. They're ergolines. LSD is an ergoline, right? LSD combines serotonin 2B receptors at a very high affinity, and it's pretty sticky. It also stays on that receptor for quite a long period of time. Psilocybin, also in the types of blood concentrations that you see from microdosing, has the ability to bind and stimulate this receptor to a significant degree. So there has not been any kind of trans echocardiographic research with psychedelics that I've seen that measures heart valves before microdosing, after a month or two of microdosing, to like really tell us, like, is there heart valve thickening that's significant that comes along with psychedelic microdosing? And is there a point that that becomes dangerous, irreversible, fibrotic heart valves? And at that point, the fix is open heart surgery. So I think a lot of people in the world of microdosing feel this is a bit mythical or overblown in some kind of way, but it is a serious, irreversible type of thing that requires an open heart surgery to fix. I think some of the even persons in the world of psychedelics have asserted that looking at this old research with LSD or with other types of things, there was not really a signal for this. I have a colleague, Kellen Thomas, at Touro University. He's also a psychiatric pharmacist, wicked smart guy. He's read to the bottom of some of this and gone through some of the older literature around it and actually just found that there's just been bad reporting by people in the psychedelic community about this data. Like people saying, oh, no one got harmed in that study. And Kellen goes back and look at it, and some number of the people had valvular heart disease and had to get open heart surgery. And so that's just bad scholarship now, isn't it? So there's a lot of people that are not pharmacologists that are saying there's no risk here, but they don't really understand where the data is like coming from. And okay, we have not demonstrated this with psychedelics yet, but Kellen's mentioned that he's gotten case reports of people that have had problems with valvular heart disease where microdosing has been involved. And so I'm thinking we need some serious testing here, and there ain't no way in what place that the FDA is approving any kind of microdosing on a chronic regimen without serious echocardiographic studies anyway. So yeah, it seems like on the one hand, I think that people want to try short courses with microdosing. They want to try really small doses of psychedelics in some intermittent way for a month or few. I don't think they're taking big risks there. I really don't. And I think that there could really be an upside for people there. The efficacy evidence is lagging behind what people are trying with microdosing. But hey, you want to try it in this controlled way for some short period of time to see. I'm in favor of persons doing that when they have a strong will to. Whereas the kind of, hey, I've been microdosing 5 days on, 2 days off for 8 months now. It's just, okay, like this is getting to the point where you're chronically taking psychedelics, and it sounds like the type of exposure that could lead to this problem if it had that problem. With the human justice system, innocent until proven guilty is nice. Right? That's the way it should be set up with a human justice system. You don't want to be assuming guilt. You want to presume innocence and have the person vindicate themselves or be convicted, right? I think in the world of public health with drugs, it should be guilty until proven innocent, right? It shouldn't be like we're using psychedelics in some brand new way with huge numbers of people that haven't been doing this before, but we haven't heard of it in the past, so probably just doesn't exist, and it's just some mythical stuff coming out of the pharmaceutical industry to make sure that you don't start microdosing. All right, like I'm sure there are people in the pharmaceutical industry that do want to attack this kind of new movement in psychiatry with psychedelics in some way. And from a public health, like the master in public health of me is just thinking like, why don't we do the research and demonstrate it's safe before we start telling everyone it is safe? Like it doesn't, because what are we going to do? What if we create a public health disaster with microdosing? It could shut down the whole thing. It could just sour the whole thing, right? It would be horrible if persons that wanted to take small doses of psychedelics to uplift mood ended up needing open heart surgery. Because of the irreversibility and seriousness of it, and the fact that there's been multiple drugs with similar pharmacology or even similar chemical structures that have been guilty of this problem in the past, it doesn't seem super logical to just assume that there's no issue with psychedelics. Like high dose MDMA on a weekly basis, you can find the case reports of people getting valvular heart disease.
Major brain damage too. And brain toxicity. Yeah.
Yeah, there's other issues with those
Yeah.
types of use patterns, right? But I think it's a little bit like, okay, you can take some of those extreme case reports and that's not microdosing. True. But canary in the coal mine, guys. Let's do the research and find where the line is, because right now we don't know where the line is. Or we're pretty sure the line is over 3 months, probably over 4 or 5 months. Maybe that's the risky zone, less than 3 months, not long enough to produce this type of chronic drug toxicity.
Did you know that your problems don't come from the situations or circumstances themselves? Your problems come from how you approach them. More specifically, your problems come from the level of consciousness that you approach them with. It's pretty simple. Here's how it works. Anytime something happens to us, we can approach the situation from various levels of consciousness. You can come from a low level of consciousness that perpetuates the problem and keeps you stuck, drained, hopeless, and under stress. Or you can come from a high level of consciousness that allows you to move forward because you can more easily tap into creative solutions and access your intuition. The good news is that at any given time, you can choose how you show up and therefore have a massive impact on how your life unfolds. The trick is to be aware of all of the options available to you, which most of us aren't, which is why most people feel stuck and unable to move forward. But that job you hate, your codependent relationship, or the numbing anxiety of not knowing your purpose in life can be the exact thing that moves you forward and gives you clarity, as long as you're approaching it from a high level of consciousness. In my coaching program, I will help you become hyper aware of your current approach and help you shift to higher levels of consciousness. By addressing blockages keeping you stuck, which are often subconscious, we unlock flow, acceptance, peace, joy, all of those things we want more of in life. And this is not woo-woo. I am using a research-validated coaching method that's benefited thousands and has been studied and developed over 25 years plus. Whether you're corporate or spiritual or both, this is an approach that offers practical integration into everyday life. And it happens to pair just brilliantly with psychedelic work. High consciousness living is achievable daily, not just during psychedelic experiences. Psychedelics illuminate the path, but it's our job to walk it every day. My coaching program will provide you with a grounded and operational way to integrate high consciousness into your daily life. I am currently onboarding new souls into my practice. So if you would like to learn more about the program, just visit modernpsychedelics.net/coaching. I've linked that for you in the show notes. Or if you are ready to apply and get on a call with me to see if this program is right for you, just go to modernpsychedelics.net/apply. That's modernpsychedelics.net/apply. All right. I can't wait to hear from you. Let's get back to the episode. How long should people wait in between their microdosing rounds?
I usually say about half the length of the microdosing course. So if you microdose for 2 months, maybe take 1 month off. If you're really bummed about that, you could plan one macro dose in that month off. You could do your 2-month microdosing. Okay, now you're going to stop microdosing for 2 weeks to fully reset your tolerance to the macro dose, do a little preparation, think about the big trip coming up, find your new baseline after that course of microdosing. Okay, I got my big experience. Now I'm going to come down. I'm going to do 2 weeks of good work, integration, thinking about that experience. And if I want to, I could re-engage with a course of microdosing at that point. So if microdosing is working well for you, it doesn't have to be this sort of like cease and desist, wait for a month kind of order. It could be a little bit more like, well, I take a month off for my safety, but in that month off, I don't have to stop my work.
Wow, so much stuff that I didn't know in what you just shared. Let's talk about interactions a little bit. Maybe we could just go through some of the main drug classes there, and you could let us know, like, definitely don't mix this with this. So, first of all, let's talk about antidepressants. What do people need to know? Obviously, you said Iboga, or Ibogaine, and ayahuasca are definite no's. What else?
Yeah, so the antidepressants, I would say the highest risk ones are probably going to be things like ayahuasca and Ibogaine. A lot of the serotonergic-based psychedelics may not work quite as well while persons are taking antidepressants, but like we've talked about, whether that's a deal breaker or not might be sort of individual.
I always thought that it was potentially actually dangerous to mix SSRIs with psilocybin, things like that, but it sounds like it just might not work?
Yeah, I mean, maybe on exceptionally rare occasions, like some weird idiosyncratic types of thing happened. But Hopkins surveyed people that were on antidepressants that mixed it with psilocybin, and they had hundreds of respondents, and the vast majority of them said the effects were diminished rather than intensified, dangerous. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about stimulants. Which one should not be mixed together and which one should not be mixed with psychedelics? And also, can you explain what you mean by stimulants, what we mean by stimulants when we talk about them?
Yeah, so maybe we'll start there. So stimulants are medications that have arousing effects to the central nervous system. So they tend to promote wakefulness, but they're typically prescribed mostly for ADHD types of indications, maybe some weight loss, maybe some binge eating, maybe some decongestant, right? There's a few different uses for stimulants out there, but probably the mainstay of stimulant prescriptions is in like ADHD therapeutics at this point. And probably the most classic stimulant is going to be like Adderall or brand name amphetamines, right? And then there's also methylphenidate, or the most famous brand name of that one is Ritalin. So I think those are probably the two biggest classic sorts of like stimulants where there's just lots and lots of prescriptions out there. I would say that with stimulants, because they're controlled substances, that the thought process starts with what kind of controlled substance user do I have on my hands? I think that's like how I think about it. It's not so much, I guess there are certain psychedelics, like I wouldn't mix a stimulant with ayahuasca, for example. I wouldn't mix it with Ibogaine again. I would probably avoid it the day of most psychedelic uses just to avoid stacking stimulants with other drugs that increase cardiovascular parameters, particularly other psychedelic stimulants like MDMA. You're adding methylenedioxymethamphetamine to someone that's taking a regular amphetamine. You're stacking amphetamines, like maybe there's some more cardiovascular risk to be worried about or concerned there. But I'll say that most persons that I speak with, at least in my practice, are in the therapeutic zone with stimulants. Their doses are kind of low to moderate, and they tend to appreciate some of the therapeutic effects that the stimulant has for them. Maybe there are some problems or side effects or aspects of it that they are not thrilled about, or, hey, in a perfect world, I wouldn't need this, but it seems to be helping for right now. That's a pretty common story. But there's also persons that are on higher doses of stimulants that have stimulant use disorders that might even be using stimulants in illicit settings or through routes of administration that are not oral. And at that point, I think you have to sort of pause and think, like, how does stimulant use disorders interface with this psychedelic experience? And does that need to be like thought about and rolled into the overall goals of what we're doing here? So with controlled substances, and stimulants is just our example here, but I would have that same thought process for benzodiazepines, opioids. Like, I would first think, what kind of relationship does the person have to the controlled substance? All right, so it's in that low dose oral therapeutic type of zone. Frankly, I think that skipping it for the day for things like psilocybin, MDMA, that's going to be good enough. Skipping it for at least 3 days before ayahuasca is going to be good enough. It would be the same for Ibogaine, because that's the elimination time for amphetamine. It doesn't show up in your urine after 72 hours or so. So why you would really need to skip it longer to avoid a drug interaction, I'm not really sure about that, right? Maybe you want to skip it longer depending on what your goals are. Oh yeah, I started at 10 milligrams of Adderall and it worked great for 6 months. And then I was on 20 and it worked great for 4 months. And now I'm on 40 and it's been 6 months and it seems like it's pooping out. And if I go without it, I feel very tired. But I plan to go to the Amazon and I've got a couple of weeks. How long should I stop it ahead of time? It's like, all right, maybe, I could say 3 days, the absolute minimum, but maybe you want to take a week off ahead of time and it's going to be a rough week and you're going to feel very low. And then you're going to do a few ayahuasca experiences. You're probably going to purge a bit and probably going to work through some stuff. And you're going to wait at least 24 hours, probably more like 48 or 72 hours after ayahuasca to think about reintroducing stimulants. And maybe you want to think long and hard about whether you really do want to reintroduce them after a couple of weeks off. But if you were, I'd probably start with 10 milligrams again, and you'll probably find that it works fairly well again, right? So sometimes I think some of these longer breaks, when a person is really taking some R&R, doing a longer kind of retreat, or is really focused on preparing and is willing to do a little bit more challenging stuff into preparation, sometimes taking longer times off to sort of reset partially therapeutic, partially problematic sorts of relationships, or when there's side effects or tolerance. I think that can be a helpful kind of thing for people. Frankly, I met somebody recently that was talking to me about their stimulant use, and they were just saying stuff like, man, if I don't take my stimulant, I'm like completely discombobulated. And we were talking about not using a stimulant the day of the session. And she was like, she lived like 75 minutes from the guide's place or something like that. And she's like, oh, I'm gonna have to Uber there because I can't drive if I don't take my stimulant. That's how bad like the focus issues are. And she was just talking about how stimulants have been an absolute miracle for her, how she went 40, 50 years of life without it. And it was just so hard in so many ways. And now I've started taking this and it's just like someone switched a light in my head and I can think clearly and I complete tasks. And I started to think, is it my own stigma against stimulants that telling me to skip her the day of this psilocybin session? If a person wants to show up as they like to show up, and that stimulant is a huge piece of how they're doing and feeling, and they're feeling very good about it. It was a tiny dose too. It was like 10 milligrams, maybe 20, something like that. Am I taking a massive risk by combining it with a moderate dose of psilocybin in that person? So that was a case that came along recently that kind of, yeah, there's a balance between our thoughts about stimulants, how they interact with psychedelics, and cognitive liberty and how a person wants to be in the world. So I say that stimulants can be done with like minimal breaks to psychedelics. Stimulants can be done with longer kinds of breaks, and stimulants can be inhaled and causing psychosis and disqualifying a person from a psychedelic experience in the near future.
I appreciate that you're just painting a picture of how many different scenarios and people there are going through this.
That's it. It's like people like the Spirit Pharmacist, he's the drug interaction guy. True, right? But every drug is attached to a person. And getting to know that person and why they're taking it and what they're bringing, what the relationship is with that substance is a massive part and almost equally important as considering the drug interaction. Again, some of the drug interactions are just black and white and dangerous, and it becomes almost like paramount, like you have to, like there isn't many other choices here. But most of the scenarios actually are not quite that way. There's a lot more gray than I think than we've historically thought anyway.
I'm definitely learning that through this conversation. I want to talk to you about Iboga and alcohol. Is there a contraindication there? Because I know when I do my Iboga retreats, we're told to avoid alcohol for as long as possible because it'll reverse the effect of the Iboga. And I'm just curious if there's like a pharmacology reason there or if it's more just an energetic thing.
Alcohol works directly on GABA channels. And I think that we're fairly well aware that drugs that work directly on GABA channels and the other big class of therapeutics out there that have this similar mechanism, not quite the same, would be benzodiazepine types of drugs. So benzodiazepines, as well as alcohol, are things that I think water down or acutely diminish responses to many different types of psychedelics, both psychedelics that work on serotonin, like psilocybin, and psychedelics that work on maybe glutamate or opioid systems like ketamine and potentially Ibogaine. So I would have to say that, yeah, it probably diminishes some of the psychedelic or psychoactive qualities of Ibogaine, but it may actually worsen some of the sedative. For example, Ibogaine is known to cause sort of like a cerebellar ataxia, or a sort of feeling of having some motor or incoordination or balance issues related to activity in the cerebellum. And that's also a target of alcohol. For example, if a person gets drunk, that motor incoordination that is an ataxia as well. I don't know if a person must avoid alcohol for weeks ahead of time for Iboga to be safe and work well. But I think that given Iboga is one of the most anti-addictive sorts of substances and a lot of people struggle with alcohol, it does seem natural to ask persons to abstain from alcohol for at least some period of time ahead of it.
Yeah, we're told specifically to avoid it, well, before and after, because if you have the alcohol after Iboga, it'll diminish some of the afterglow and the benefits of it, is what we're told. So yeah, it's very curious.
I haven't heard so much with alcohol, but I think with other types of narcotic agents like cocaine or other types of opioids, it's also known that Ibogaine resets a person's tolerance to those types of things. So reintroducing substances after Ibogaine could be quite dangerous because a person may think, I was accustomed to using this dose before Ibogaine, and that was what gave some mild effect that I liked and was pleasant. they do an Ibogaine experience, they have a big sort of reset that happens to substances, and they're more or less substance naive. They have no tolerance anymore. They go back and use those sorts of doses that they were accustomed to, then it can become dangerous. Kenneth Alper has done some nice case series around this and demonstrated that when things really go wrong with Ibogaine, there oftentimes is this kind of reintroduction of substance that happens very quickly, or even during the Ibogaine experience. It seems to explain a lot of the toxicity a person encountered.
Do you know about Kana? About any interactions that you know about?
Not a whole lot, no. It's supposed to be an herbal SSRI type of medication, or herbal SRI. I don't know if it's selective for the serotonin reuptake pump. But people tend to report this sort of like mild euphoric kind of effect to it, which would be consistent with a mild increase in serotonin neurotransmission. It seems that some persons are hoping to create some kind of herbal ecstasy concoction using things like Kana and Blue Lotus and cacao ceremonially, maybe in some type of combination. So I've not heard of anyone just overtly report like, I took Kana with substance X and I felt like it was overtly toxic. But given it's serotonergic, I would think that it has some level of interaction potential with other serotonergic types of substances, and whether it's one of these dangerous or more upset stomach, anxiety, a bit of a headache, I'm not really sure, but I'm guessing it's towards the latter.
Yeah, I've heard Kana plus Iboga is a no-go. That's what I heard that from someone who's a nurse practitioner in that world.
Yeah, I think probably you want to absolutely minimize the number of chemical inputs that are coming into your body with Iboga and Ibogaine, like overall. That is one where it seems like the less things that you're taking, probably the better. The drug has an incredibly complex mechanism. It seems very sensitive to changes in CYP2D6. There's lots of different substances that can block CYP2D6 that could increase Ibogaine or noribogaine concentrations. There's also the potential for different types of substances to have effect on electrocardiogram types of rhythms that could actually increase the cardiotoxic effect or the QTC intervals associated with Ibogaine. Whether it's for a pharmacokinetic liver-based reason or a pharmacodynamic like within the brain, or maybe even a cardiac conduction type of reason, there's an interplay between them with some types of substances, and makes good sense that you probably want to avoid quite a few things.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's just such a complex plant, especially if you're doing Iboga, not Ibogaine. There's just so much that we don't know about it. It's probably best to minimize everything else that you're putting in with that.
There's this one really nice review article that came out maybe a couple years ago about Iboga or Ibogaine. And I'm going to butcher the quote. I'll paraphrase it though. But there's this one piece in the middle of it. You know, it's a well-written article with like all these references and things like that. They're not saying it just because they didn't do their own research or something, but they really have this italicized quote in the middle of it that is kind of like, the true mechanism of Ibogaine is totally opaque to pharmacology. It was just kind of like, cool, like a humble admission about this substance.
Yeah, it's definitely a humbling medicine in all the ways. Okay, I have to ask you about 5-MeO-DMT and cannabis. What is going on there? I have had the most intense reactivations of 5-MeO-DMT doing cannabis and even other psychedelics. But yeah, what's going on with cannabis and 5-MeO? Because I know, have you read Tryptamine Palace by any chance? Because he smokes like the bufo or the 5-MeO with cannabis in that book, but are they contraindicated? Like, tell me about that. I need to know.
I mean, I think a lot of persons that I speak with that are 5-MeO-DMT practitioners might draw a line between like cannabis. What kind of cannabis user do I have on my hands? Is this somebody that uses a puff of blueberry kush at bedtime instead of Ambien, and that's been a nice substitution for them? Or is this someone that's holding 6 sacred cannabis rituals for themselves every single day, but still very depressed and wants to remember their childhood, but their memory feels a bit fuzzy from all the cannabis ceremonies? Like when a person is overusing cannabis, it tends to block emotions and kind of get in the way of psychedelic experiences and effects, whereas a person is using cannabis on a less frequent, intermittent types of basis, it tends to not be as much of a deal or an issue or problem. 5-MeO-DMT is fairly notorious for creating these states in which a lot of the feelings and sensations from the experience return to a person. And this is called a reactivation with 5-MeO DMT. Cannabis is one of the kind of leading substances, particularly THC-based cannabis, that can trigger these reactivation episodes. Another one that gets flagged relatively often is the supplement melatonin for sleep. Melatonin is a tryptamine-based neurotransmitter. It's a 5-substituted tryptamine neurotransmitter. So perhaps it's possible that 5-MeO DMT interfaces with melatonin receptors as well as serotonin receptors. I've never seen any article that tries to really investigate that or test the binding of 5-substituted tryptamines against melatonin receptors. So I don't know. It doesn't happen to everybody. But I think part of your counseling with 5-MeO DMT is that this is an incredibly powerful molecule that tends to change a person. This is transformational work that we're engaging with. So you may notice that you respond to different types of substances differently. And you may notice particularly using other psychoactive types of substances in the days to weeks after that when you use them, it feels a lot more like the 5-MeO DMT experience, or it's a lot stronger than you're expecting. So maybe you want to either avoid those things for a period of time, or if you are going to be re-engaging with them, do it at times and spaces and places where if there was this reactivation that happened, that you would be able to work with what's happening rather than, oh my gosh, this shouldn't be happening right now, and leading to dysphoria and panic attacks. But what is the mechanism? I'm not really sure overall. I would say that you can get these sorts of reactivation episodes triggered by cannabis with other psychedelics too. I've had it reported with psilocybin, with ayahuasca, but 5-MeO DMT does seem to be a little bit more higher firepowered, or the reactivations tend to occur a little bit more frequently than with some other types of psychedelic substances.
Okay, darn, I was hoping you would have the answer to that, but I guess it remains a mystery. 5-MeO is my absolute favorite and my obsession at the moment. I just had my first experience with it 6 months ago. I'm curious. I downloaded you have a 5-MeO guide. I downloaded that. I've yet to read it. Can you share something with us that you find really fascinating about 5-MeO from the lens of pharmacology?
Oh, something about 5-MeO through the lens of pharmacology. Okay, so like how is 5-MeO different than some other tryptamines, right? So it's notorious as the God molecule, or creating this like true like non-dual type of experience where the subject-object relationship just completely collapses and the person finds themselves in this place of total oneness with source or the universe or God. So that's, I would say, that almost like the quintessential type of 5-MeO DMT experience. And it seems that 5-MeO DMT is very non-dual and entheogenic, but it really isn't very hallucinogenic at all. For example, NN-DMT tends to have a lot more hyperfractal hallucinations to it than things like 5-MeO DMT. 5-MeO DMT is interesting compared to the classic tryptamines, which include stuff like psilocybin and NN-DMT, because 5-MeO DMT can fully stimulate serotonin receptors, whereas things like psilocybin and NMD can only partially stimulate serotonin receptors. 5-MeO DMT does work on the serotonin 2A receptor, which is supposedly the kind of psychedelic receptor, but it's actually stronger and works significantly on the serotonin 1A receptor as well. And that might be why you get less hallucinogenic effects with 5-MeO DMT. It seems that drugs that work strongly on serotonin 1A receptors have less hallucinogenic properties to them than ones that are a little bit more selective than for serotonin 2A receptors. 5-MeO DMT is probably primarily metabolized by monoamine oxidase, which creates the potential for real serious drug interactions with monoamine oxidase inhibitors with it, and may also be able to block serotonin reuptake, which is another reason why it could be dangerous with monoamine oxidase inhibitors, whereas NN-DMT psilocybin doesn't block the serotonin reuptake pump, doesn't increase intrasynaptic serotonin, so the likelihood of those being dangerous with monoamine oxidase inhibitors is much, much less overall. I don't know, I could probably just keep going with a bunch of gobbledygook, but like you said, I have a 5 guide on it that really walks through some of this pharmacologic information in a hopefully linear way that you can at least glean parts of it and follow along.
I definitely plan on digging into it at one point. Thank you for sharing that. It's really validating to hear you say that there is a reason that it's not very hallucinogenic, because I was talking about that on my Instagram page when I was sharing about it, and people were coming at me and being like, what are you talking about? It's super visual. It's super hallucinogenic. And I didn't find it to be that way. But of course, every experience is different for everyone. And yeah.
It's visual in the sense that it's like a total white room with the whiteness and the brightness. And occasionally, if I've taken like very big doses of it, there is some sort of swirling hallucinogenic patterns that are occurring, particularly in the first few seconds or just after like inhalation. But once the experience really gets going, I personally have not experienced much that I would consider like hallucinogenic activity. Entheogenic, very much, but less generating a lot of visual activity and much more like just a big, consciousness and emotional kind of space.
Yeah, pure energy, pure consciousness. Yeah, amazing. Thank you for that. Is there anything else that you feel like you would like to share with our audience? And also let us know where people can find you. How can they enlist your support? You're such an amazing resource. And what offerings you have for people if they want to learn more.
Yeah, so people can find me. I think you mentioned, like, I do a little bit of social media. I'm not incredibly active, but Instagram, Facebook, occasionally LinkedIn. But if you really want the best of me, spiritpharmacist.com is my website. I have a newsletter that I send out on a monthly basis where I basically select 6 or 7 of the psychedelic research articles that came out in the last month that I think are real groundbreaking kind of stuff and summarize that. So joining my email list is a wonderful way to stay connected with the things I do and also just get ongoing research updates. I have a nice blog page if you want some other types of free resources through the blog page. That's where you can find some of the downloads that you mentioned, like the 5 guide. I've got one on breakthrough psychedelics, which are MDMA, psilocybin, and ketamine. I have an antidepressant and psychedelic drug interaction and tapering guide. That's probably the most popular resource that I've ever put together. And then I also run, I do 3 things, right? I do psychopharmacology consulting. Yes, you can book an individual consultation a la carte if you want to, work with me that way. I sell different types of psychedelic education materials, webinar workshops, as well as courses. And then I run a member resource and support program, which essentially hybridizes those things. So it's a subscription-based program, but instead of just buying one course, you're just renting a library of all the educational resources that I've ever put together. Anything new always just goes directly to the member program. It comes with an email-based drug information service. So you've got questions that are coming up on an ongoing basis. Maybe you're getting some intake forms that have some different medications or illnesses, and you would like another set of eyes on those. That can happen through the drug information or the email-based question and answer service with the member program. And then with the member subscription, you're also entitled to discounted rates on consulting. So you want to consult regularly, you get a break there. You want to extend those discounted rates to your clients or applicants, you can do that as a facilitator or member of the resource and support program. So I would say if you really want to have a collaborative and longitudinal relationship with me, the member resource and support program is definitely the way to go. Or if it's a little bit more, I would like to talk to him one time, or I'm just very interested in this particular course, then those are options too.
Amazing. You are well resourced. Wow. There's something there for everyone. I think I'll probably look at joining that membership at some point because I'm just starting my facilitation journey. So yeah, it's so great to know that's available. Thank you so much, Ben. This has been so informative and I just wish you all the best. Thank you for allowing the psychedelic space to benefit from your skills and knowledge.
Thank you for allowing me to be in the psychedelic space. This is a bi-directional, mutually beneficial, a beautiful kind of relationship that's unfolding here. And thanks so much for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, that's the way it is here. Yeah, win-win. Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much for listening to and supporting the show. To stay in touch, sign up for my mailing list, which can be found in the show notes or on modernpsychedelics.net. If this episode sparked something within, please let me know by leaving a review of the Modern Psychedelics podcast on Apple and Spotify. This really helps to share these messages with those who need them, which is the whole reason why I do what I do. And if you haven't already, come join the ongoing conversation over on Instagram with other beautiful souls. We have an incredible and conscious community over at the handle Modern Psychedelics. And don't forget that the work begins after you come back down to earth. And I'm standing shoulder to shoulder, doing it with you.